Hi, and welcome to the Long Range Shooting and Custom Rifle Building podcast presented by Wolf Precision Incorporated, where we learn about and share long range shooting and custom rifle building. I am your host, Jamie Dotson, and welcome to the show. Hi, and welcome to episode 153 of Wolf Precision's Long Range Shooting and Custom Rifle Building podcast. I am Jamie Dotson, I'm your host, and welcome to the show. In this episode, we're going to start into our series on preparing to train, coming from the eyes of people getting ready to learn the art of marksmanship. And we have, in this episode, throwing Richard under the bus again and surprising him with the content that he didn't know we were going to talk about this morning. So good morning, Richard.
Good morning, Jamie. How's it going today?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm good, but coffee's running a little light at the moment.
We might have to take a coffee break in the middle. I agree. Well, it's going to be a great series here. And in this one, I just want to touch base on what we're going to cover, some areas that we watch people constantly come in and wanting to learn and master the art of long-range shooting, and the troubles that they have and some of the common errors that they make, and just food for thought to really set yourself up to learn and get the most out of yourself. And that way you can get on to mastering and enjoying yourself on the firing line rather than all the frustration that we constantly see. So it ought to be a great podcast. So without further ado, here we go. All right, I do want to say a quick thank you to two of our sponsors. We want to thank TriggerTech. TriggerTech is the maker of fine rifle triggers. We put them in all of our custom rifles here. Everything from the new TriggerTech Diamond 2-stage right down to the TriggerTech Primary. They're easy to install, they're safe, and they're end-user friendly for adjustability. So if you want the best and you want to upgrade your rifle, stop over to TriggerTech.com. That's TriggerTech.com today. We'd also like to thank Krieger Barrels. Krieger is the maker of fine-cut rifle barrels. They're made in the great state of Wisconsin. They have a new program called Krieger Direct where you can log on and order your barrel and have it in as little as 2 to 3 business days. So if you want to build a custom rifle and you need a world-class barrel, stop over to KriegerDirect.com. That's KriegerDirect.com today. All right, so in this podcast here, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the pros and cons for students or for people that want to get into long-range shooting or just marksmanship in general. Some of the things that we see here at the school all the time, especially when people bring their own equipment. They don't have any ill intentions. They didn't make mistakes on purpose. They didn't say, hey, I'm going to buy stuff that's going to give me a headache. They do their research. A lot of great marketing for a lot of great equipment out there. There's a lot of great marketing for a lot of crappy equipment too. But the big thing is the difference is when they come here, we want them to leave and enjoy themselves and learn. And it doesn't always work that way. I mean, sometimes they suffer horrible consequences at the hands of the equipment that they selected to bring here to learn the art of what they do. So, opening thoughts on this subject?
Yeah, there's several aspects to that, right? So, people coming to the school have taken a very positive step in two areas. Firstly, learning the fundamentals of marksmanship, which is hard to get, hard to teach yourself, and hard to find someone who can teach you at the local level. Like, there's still some high schools that have rifle shooting teams, et cetera, but they're few and far between. So unless you're joining the military or coming from that background, you've probably had no basic introduction to firearms and actually how to shoot. And as I like to say, guys learn to shoot by watching TV, and ladies learn to shoot by listening to an instructor.
Yeah, I'm gonna pause right there for a second, because what you just said is actually why we started the long range shooting school. So before all the shooting schools and everything that happened right now, I think our first class was actually held in 2008, and our first public class was held in 2009. But we did private training before that, and the whole reason the shooting school started was people coming to the sniper matches with all the heart into it. They love it, the draw, the lure, the how do you hit something that far away? And after 2 days of being destroyed, of not knowing the fundamentals, and the reason we started the school here is because everybody at these sniper matches, especially the guys who were competing, came from some type of military law enforcement. They had training.
Right.
And I said the only reason these people suffered, and a lot of times quit, they just wouldn't go to another match because they embarrassed themselves, they didn't do well, they feel stupid, whatever. But we started the long range shooting school it was for the people that want to do this that didn't have the opportunity to take any training of any kind. And I said, if we could just take 2 days and go over the core things they just didn't know, and they didn't know what they didn't know, and they would be off to the races. And we sat down, made the books, made the curriculum, and the very next year launched the school. And it was just for that particular person that you had mentioned, because they're going at it with no training, no help, and there's just so much out there that they don't know, and they don't enjoy themselves.
Right. And we're getting immediately off subject a little bit here, diving into the weeds a little bit. But I think what you find is it's all well and good to read a book that says, do this, do that, think the other. But having someone nearby that has the knowledge and the skill set to be able to give you some on-site, on-hand, in front of you instruction at the same time that you're trying to apply the stuff that you just learned from the book, that's invaluable. Yeah. And it pays back dividends. I mean, we get shooters coming to the school now, some of them have a lot of experience and really don't need much guidance apart from how to use the modern equipment. And we get other people who come to the school that really don't know much about rifles. And, I think I talked about them before. There was a couple of guys last year who came along who were pistol shooters, probably, from what I could gather, super experienced competitive pistol shooters. They were like, yeah, we don't know much about rifles. We shoot our ARs once in a while just for a bit of fun, but we want to learn how to do this stuff properly. And they got a lot out of the school, I think. Yeah. But they also knew what they were looking for, and they knew what they wanted to get out of the school. So they were already focused on what they were trying to do. So anyway, getting back into it, what is it that people want when they want to get into competition? I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff there, from the fundamentals to equipment to, really learning how to use that equipment, and then getting rounds down range. I think one of the biggest things that I've really picked up on, which I always kind of knew anyway, which is it doesn't really matter what format you do your training in with a rifle, whether it be an air rifle, a 22, 223, or whatever your competition gun is, it doesn't really matter. The key is that you have a focused approach and regularly get out there and shoot. And the guys that shoot more often, not a lot, but more often, are the ones that consistently have a higher skill set and perform better.
I think what sets our school apart, and I often thought about this, and this isn't a plug for any of the schools, this is what we try to do differently is we're not teaching you. Like, you can read a history book and you can read about history, but we teach you how to study the art of history. We teach you how to study history. And what we, like, the example would be like, we're not teaching you just the fundamentals of marksmanship. We're teaching you how to train. Mm-hmm. And so when you go home, it's not that we just taught you this recipe of 1 through 10 things that you're supposed to be doing, but we actually teach you how to physically apply that and how to use that then to train and become a marksman. Not just say, here's the process as you go through. Good luck on going out and applying it. And I think, we get a lot of comments, like people that have been to other schools. Again, not a plug for the school. We're not saying this bragging. We certainly appreciate everyone that's ever been to our school here. We are not trying to say that we're the best at everything that we do. But a lot of clients that have come to our school that have been to other schools, although they sometimes can't quite put their finger on exactly everything that but overall, we always get the comment that it was one of the best classes that they've taken. And I often wonder, like, what separates us besides the great personalities of me and Richard is I think that we teach how to train. Like, we go that one step beyond. It's like when you get home, now here's what you really have to do to understand how to become better, not just here's the fundamentals.
Yeah, absolutely. We are focused on not just the couple of days that people are here, but also practically what happens, what to do next. And I think most of the time, if I'm remembering things correctly, we get to the point with people hitting, just simple stuff, right? Hitting a water jug in the wind at 1,000 yards. People who can hit a water jug in the wind at 1,000 yards are ready to go to a competition, right? They've got the skill set at that point. And the biggest problem is keeping those skills sharp. That's the biggest problem for all of us, I think, is finding the time to do whatever we need to do to get to the range and just throw, 15, 25 rounds down range and just, now I remember back again, what I was trying to do and what I'm trying to get out of it. And I think the biggest problem there is finding a way to train. So in terms of what beginners need to do, or people that want to get into long range shooting or shooting sports in general, is you have to find the time and be willing to commit some time every couple of weeks or so, or every couple of days if you've got the space and the time available, and find a way to train, whether it be, as I say, with an air rifle or with a 22 or with some other training rifle like a 223.
And staying after it and knowing how to approach the training to get out of the training what you're trying to work on. Identify your weaknesses. What are you focusing on? And we always try to focus on the core of the fundamentals, and then how do we dope our rifle? How do we get all that? The last class was amazing. So we had our first long range shooting school of the year. Here, we had really not the greatest weather. April's iffy in Pennsylvania, although the gods did smile on us on day 2 and we got a break in the weather for a little bit. But it was a very inexperienced class. In other words, most in the class had never shot beyond 300 yards ever. And it was a race at 1,000 yards just to get chances to shoot at gallon water jugs because they cleaned them all up.
That's right.
And it was windy. It was, 8 to 12 mile an hour winds. It wasn't a perfect day.
No.
And prone with a rifle and a bipod.
People did, the peeps did really good. And I'm honestly having, I had a long break from the shooting schools, right? So I was there early on and helping out a little bit, off and on, depending on what was going on with work. And then I haven't really caught up with Jamie apart from say hello once or twice in probably 10 years. We talked on the phone occasionally. And then coming back into it last year, it always surprises me, but at the same time, I'm not surprised when I see people hitting targets beyond 700 yards, because of just my approach and my thoughts about long range shooting is that, I can teach anyone to hit a target at 300 yards, even someone that's never fired a rifle before, get them down behind the gun and they'll be on target and they'll be shooting within 3 inches, easily within a matter of minutes. And then getting them out to 500 yards takes a little bit more. They start thinking about it and you're trying to give them some tips on how to do things. But once people get beyond 700 yards and able to consistently make those shots and not be wildly 2 foot this way, 1 foot that way, a foot over, 2 foot low. Once you get to that point, that's where the skill starts coming in, right? And so you're looking for the consistency, and as I say, it surprises me, and yet I'm not surprised anymore that when people go through the curriculum and the build-up that we do at the school, well, you do at the school, the build-up through the curriculum, that people are able to consistently hit targets at 1,000 yards. And of course, it's replicated the following day. We do like a little shooting test on the last day of the school, and generally people do very well.
Yeah,
and again, I'm pleasantly surprised, right? Because you've taken people from, everyone knows how to hold a rifle, basically. Well, kinda, right? And then everybody knows how to pull a trigger. Well, kinda. But you've taken many people from that level of skill, almost, a 1 out of 10, right? You've taken them from a 1 out of 10 and you've taken them up to I would say a 7 or an 8, right? Because to get to a 9 or a 10 is almost impossible for most of us. And you've taken them right up to that edge and then also given them some thinking of what to do when they get home, right? How to train, how to get things comfortable, how to get into the rifles. I mean, all that kind of stuff that you need to take it to the next level. So, as I say, I'm always pleasantly surprised, and I think so are the students as well. I mean, a lot of people have been shooting a long time, and then they come to the school because, we kind of know how to shoot. We kind of know how to dial a scope, but we never do it. And, we kind of know how to work with the wind, but we haven't really been taught. And we kind of know what kind of equipment we want, but we don't really know. And so I think it helps people focus that where they have that interest and want to learn the skill a little bit better, they have access to a way to do it and ultimately get where they want to go. You know, whether it's a hunting personality or it's a competition personality or it's just someone who wants to have fun with their friends at the weekend. You know, they can have a little skill and apply a little skill to it, which is great.
I think in the long range shooting school too is they do it on their own. So when we're on day 2 and we're working on long stuff, they're making their own wind calls. They're setting their own rifles up. We're not dialing the rifles in and doing it all the work and then just having them basically be the trigger puller. And so we try to, and even on test days the same way. They've got to do it all on their own. And that way when they leave, we know that hey, they sort of got it. It's embedded good enough. But let's go back to the core of it all, because in the last podcast I sort of came a little straightforward on equipment, bad equipment, wrong equipment being purchased, in some cases making dangerous situations. And I talked about the setup and the shooting school here, the difference between those that come through successful and the ones that come through learning a lot and getting the most from the school. And we spend like the whole first day, like an hour and a half in the morning, talking about, whether it's ours or any other equipment, talking about the importance of your equipment just to get started on a baseline level of how good it has to be and some food for thought. And I want to talk to in this podcast here, just setting us up for breaking down everything that you're going to need to set up to really go out and enjoy this and not let your equipment cause you just tons of heartache and pain. And the last class was very interesting. We did a ballistics class, which we had a rifle that was hamstrung together, probably pretty common now, but again, with inexperienced people putting them together can cause some issues. But then factory guns too, some of the shortcomings that's very, very common from rifles themselves, the stocks that they're setting in, the bipods that they've selected, the calibers that they've selected, the optics and rings and bases. So they come here with all of the best intentions, but with the absolute worst tools in their toolbox that's going to cause them tons of issues. So let's talk about, if you want, because we're going to break it down in the next podcast, maybe the very next podcast, we'll talk about the importance of when you're selecting your rifle to think about the stock. But let's just break down the last class a little bit. What did you see on the firing line that you know caused some issues right out of the gate? This is people bringing their own rifles.
Yeah, zero stop.
Yeah.
Zero stops. I mean, we take it for granted, right? I mean, I've been shooting my main rifle scope with a zero stop now 17 years, right? I think I've had I bought Schmidt & Bender, maybe not 17, maybe 16 years. I bought Schmidt & Bender, I had a Night Force, and it was just when there was a few scopes that had zero stops at that time, and the Schmidt was definitely one of them. And believe me, I'm no mega spender on rifles. Jamie will tell you about that. But I coughed up to buy the Schmidt because at the time there were people bringing zero stops onto the market, and they were all new to it. And Schmidt, I think, was one of the first guys that I knew about that had a zero stop. So that made a big difference to me. And I also, at that point, I went from MOAs to Mills as well when I bought the Schmidt. So I've, been a proponent. And in those days, by the way, Jamie was still shooting with MOAs. So I was a big proponent of moving to Mills and living with that, right? Because it has pluses and minuses, like every decision you make. But yeah, zero stop. So I think, if you want to make your life easier in the long distance world of shooting, and also safer, right? Because none of us want to, we all own the projectiles that come out the end of the barrel that we pull the trigger on. And we all want to make sure that they're going where we want them to go and not disappearing over the hedgerow by 25 feet. So I think zero stop is a necessary investment for anybody that's planning on shooting over, if you regularly go to a range and it's more than 500 yards, I think that you should strongly, think about investing in a scope with zero stop.
And a lot of the companies now offer it, not because they're being great guys offering it. It's a safety thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you can go out of rotation and you can put rounds.
And we've seen it.
We've
seen it and called, a halt to, and people have gone, oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah, it matches. It's not uncommon. People be out of rotation over and under targets.
Yeah.
So The scopes is a big one, and I think that deserves maybe even one or two podcasts just to talk about trying to select the right scope that's going to serve you well. It's a micrometer. What about the bipods and the stocks? So a lot of people, we need bipods. We teach the fundamentals of marksmanship prone because it's a very intimate position to be in with the rifle, to learn how it's supposed to recoil and track, and your interaction is quite different than a bench. But we had 2 bipods on the line. No, again, customers that bring this stuff don't know. They just don't know what they don't know. And 2 of the bipods were very plasticky all over the place. I know that some of the misses that they had was just simply because of and it was weak on the stock. Like, you couldn't even level the gun up without them just twisting and moving around.
Yeah, I think that's a function of the materials that were in use on those bipods. It's hard to say. Yeah. Right, we have some customers who come, to shoot, and they'll bring. I think we had one guy bring a $2,500 bench rest style bipod thing, which had like a little, not a golf ball, it was more like a billiards ball on the end of it for micro adjusting. And I was like, holy heck, here we are in F class Central, which, okay, I get it, right? That's what they use, and that's what everybody has to have. So it's one end of the spectrum. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you can buy a Magpul bipod, fairly lightweight, made of polymer like a lot of Magpul stuff is. And yeah, it works as a bipod, but it doesn't lock up as well as an Atlas does. I actually don't own an Atlas. I'm still running, I've got 5 Harris S, whatever they were.
Which, by the way, is solid as can be.
Which still work great. Yeah. They are super solid. And, Jamie and I were just sort of passing back and forth and talking about this, and we were saying, well, you can buy a Harris for, what are they, $115, I think, and those things are rock solid, and they're good value, and they're not heavy. And like, I always look at things now in terms of how much pain and suffering I'm going to get if I keep buying the heaviest stuff. It's going to hurt me now when I go out hunting or whatever. So I always look for, it's always a trade-off now between how strong it is, fit for purpose, and also then how much it weighs. And I think the Harris is still there. It's not cool anymore.
That's right.
I know that for sure, but I don't try and be cool anymore.
And when you fold the legs forward, if you've never had one, you're probably going to pinch your fingers once or twice, which will make you speak in tongue.
But in our world, we used to use that as part of the training, right? If you haven't done it, you haven't been there, right? So, but I mean, the Harris still does it, and I think that's dare I say it, that's a better purchase, and is a more purposeful bipod than buying a Magpul. Yeah. And by the way, everybody, I love Magpul stuff, so it's not that I'm not hitting on Magpul here. I'm just saying that in our world, for precision rifle, the Harris will deliver everything that you want, and it's probably less than half the price of an Atlas. And by the way, I'm not hitting on the Atlas because I use Atlas because Jamie has Atlas here. So on the test rifles and so on, we shoot Atlas, and I love that as well. But it's heavy. I think it's heavier than a Harris.
Yeah. And so we're going to go back and dive into all of these things and break them down and give some really good suggestions, because in the end, with the collection of all these errors that people make coming to the school or getting into this can cause you issues before you even start to learn what we're trying to teach. So bipod selections. And we've had some of the most expensive bipods on the planet come through that were rickety as can be. They were ultra light, ultra thin, probably great on a sheep hunt to 300 yards, but not a good choice for learning the art of marksmanship.
And also with everything, every new hobby that you get into or you start expanding into, you got to be careful with gear acquisition because all of this stuff is expensive. And if you end up buying twice, it's going to hit you.
2 of the wrong things are probably more expensive than one of the right things.
Yeah.
The other thing that causes, we're going to touch base on in the future, just putting out there everything that's going to be covered in this series, because it's going to take a little while. And we might even invite some other guest speakers on, and while me and Richard are talking to them, maybe people in the industry. But the stock and the rifle, the caliber selection. So one of the things that I think is, I look at the stocks like this. There are a lot of semi-lightweight, tactical-looking rifles. I call them tactical, COOL. They look the part, but when you get on them to level them up or you put any pressure on them, they're flexing and bowing and moving. And, there's a lot of stocks that you won't see on our website because we get asked once in a while, hey, I don't see the stock on your website for sale. Don't you build on that? And as much as if the customer insisted that we would build it, but we would warn them like crazy that it just flexes and bows. It's like hanging on to something that's got almost like a rubber band type thing. And two of the rifles in the last class, I mean, I don't know if it was you or somebody else, is just, hey, look at this over here. Because either you're twisting it or somebody's pushing down on it and just watching how much it flexed and moved. That's not good, again, for what we're trying to teach. And it causes a lot of issues here at the school. So food for thought?
Yeah, I was actually surprised, to be honest. I was expecting that they would have been more rigid than they actually were.
One of them was a pretty big brand, which I think both of us actually like a lot.
I was very disappointed.
Yeah.
I was thinking about that on my drive home that night, and I was kind of surprised, to be honest, because I hold that particular brand in very high regard, and I was disappointed with two aspects of that, which was one, the rigidity of the overall rifle, but secondly, I was kind of disappointed in the performance as well, because it was doing some stuff that I wasn't expecting, and maybe it didn't like the ammo. I'm still trying to come up with justifications for that to try and make it still okay in my mind. Because if I was going to buy a factory rifle to start in the long range shooting,
that would have been your choice.
That would have been my choice.
Or maybe not with that stock, but that brand.
Definitely.
Yeah,
definitely that brand. They do another stock that's more like a stock, but I'm not a stock guy. I'm a chassis guy, so I probably would have gone for that exact same rifle.
Yeah.
So I'm not particularly sure, but of course I would have hand loaded for it as well. And you can always eke out a bit more performance when you hand load.
Would you have been happy, knowing at the level that you shoot at, would you have been happy with that stock long term?
Wow, you're making me sound like a good shooter, Jimmy. I like that. No, I would not have been happy with that rifle if at this point, I guess I think I've mentioned this before on the podcast. I mean, I've always been lucky, right? When I got into this hobby, I went and bought a base Remington 700 and then had it like fully worked on by a really, really, really good gunsmith. And so I've always had a rifle that shoots better than I do. And then my other rifles, which I've just cut the herd down significantly actually in the last 6 months, but my other rifles, mostly smaller caliber. And I always bed them, and they've always shot what I've thought was really, really well. Mm-hmm. So even like I have 22s that consistently shoot half-inch group because I put a lot of work into them, but they shoot really, really well with cheapo ammo. But yeah, I was kind of disappointed.
Yeah.
I was kind of disappointed. It wasn't like I've had that brand rifle before. I actually had one in 243, and it shot inside of an inch consistently, and it actually would shoot inside an inch and a half at 200 yards consistently. So it was actually very good, for an off-the-shelf rifle. Yeah, I was kind of disappointed in what it did.
And I know some of you are probably asking, like, say the brand. but I always try to be fair that I never want to use a broad brush and say, well, because a lot of these companies make other rifles with different stocks and chassis. But for both me and Richard have owned this brand, and to say that it was walking on its point of impact, so it had stress in the barrel or something else was going on with it.
Something else was going
a lot.
on with it.
It was not really out of the gate gun. It was a couple inches off on the first shot, and as it warmed up, it settled back and did it all 3 days. So that's an indication it got stress in the barrel somehow, which that can happen, right? But there was three brands, separate.
And it wasn't so old that the barrel was shot out.
No.
It was I think it was in 600-700 rounds, if I remember correctly. So, yeah, it's disappointing.
There was three brands on the line. And here's the thing. I think most of them ran from $1,200 to $2,700. Hence my last podcast.
Oh, no, those are more.
Are they really?
Yeah.
And one of them, not saying the other brand, one of them was a higher end bolt gun as well. So there was three that would, as a new shooter or someone new to our business, all three were good representations of what you might be looking at as a new shooter coming into this industry. And I don't think any three would have been the right choice for people to start really I mean, they worked and they worked okay, and they were good enough to get the job done, but eventually at least considering replacing the stocks if they were still good shooters and upgrading them I don't think out of the gate any of them would be a long-term solution for anybody.
No, but isn't that fairly common, though, that people would, you look at getting into a new hobby like this, and then you look around and you go, oh, my God, I'm going to spend $5,000 on a rifle. I'm going to spend $3,000 to $4,000 on an optic. I've got a bunch of accessories I got to buy. That's another $2,000. Then I got to go to a match. That's probably going to cost me $1,000 by the time I've traveled. And you know what I mean? It does start adding up. And there is a point where you have to say, man, I hope I really want to do this.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes it's funny too, because it's priced, but it's not always. Like I look back at the Oryx chassis. Yeah. And it sells for like what,
$400, $450,
and it is as solid as some of the old AI. So it's solid because they didn't do as much machining on it to keep the cost down. But it's super rigid. And for me, I'm thinking, man, that would be an awesome upgrade, even though it looks like a cheaper stock. Be 10 times more solid than like. So, for example, like in one of our rifles with the igniter with an Oryx chassis, might be like $3,500 or $3,600. Full custom rifle with a Krieger or bad action, all that. But yes, it's a cheaper stock. It's not a Masterpiece Arms. It's not a Foundation. It's not any of those. But it will shoot right with them. It will shoot right with them and still allow you to grow as a shooter long term until you want to invest in your chassis once you select your chassis. Yeah.
So I mean, there's a lot of I don't know how to put this. You can go over the top.
You can
with how much you spend on the stock. I mean, at the end. So here's Richard speaking, not Jamie, but here's Richard speaking. I think that if you got an Oryx chassis and you bedded it, did a proper bedding job on your action with an Oryx chassis, you're going to be a happy camper with how the rifle shoots.
Yeah, adjustable length of pull and cheek piece, and better than any of the 3 factory stocks that we've seen on a lot, even though they looked cooler.
They did look cool.
Yeah,
I'll give them. They get. There's another YouTuber I follow, and he always has a cool factor on certain things. It's like it may not be very good, but it looks cool.
It looks cool,
and that's kind of interesting, right? Because people want stuff that looks good as well.
Eye candy, yeah. They want that one when they break the rifle out. The other people look over and go, ooh.
Because I said that with that rifle that didn't shoot so well. Yeah. It's like, wow, that looks pretty sweet.
It did, yeah. It definitely.
I hate to say it, but I was very disappointed, and if that had been me, I know that company, like a lot of companies are, they do a 1 MOA guarantee. And if it had done that in the first 100 rounds, I hate to say it, but I would have taken it back.
Yeah, me too. It was not up to where that company would normally be.
No, sure. not at all.
Yeah.
And I mean, I said, I was coming up with all different reasons with James. Like, well, do you think it was just cold shooter? And James was like, no, because it would come right in, and it did it like 4 times.
Yeah. It definitely had some issues. And then, we're going to come back and we're going to talk about, we're going to break down accessories. We'll do that as a complete separate podcast. We'll talk about stocks. And then we're going to dive really into optics.
Right.
First focal plane, second focal plane, branding, where they're manufactured. In this case, I'm giving Richard the heads up to do some research, so that way I don't throw him under the bus. It's like let's surprise Richard in the morning with a new subject.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think people will be surprised on where a lot of the optics are made. A lot of them are branded the same, and it's not that they're terrible, but if you go back and you do your research, again, I'm talking like as a new shooter. Getting into what we're doing, having their zero wander, having their zero not return to zero from day to day, which happens here. Like they shoot great the first day, we run some drills. Next day they show up on the firing line. First round's out of the gun, they're not zeroed again. So now they got to take a half an hour of their morning and zero.
Yep.
They run the rest of the day. Next day they come back after working the knobs for a full day. They're not zeroed again, and that's a frustrating place to be.
Yes, it is. Yes, and I've honestly not experienced that myself because of the route that I've taken.
Right.
But I would be very disappointed if that was one of my rifles and it wandered all over the place like that, because, as a hunter, I mean, if you're going to take 1 or 2 shots and you know where it's going to go on that first shot, as long as it's consistently there, you can kind of get away with it. But Jamie and I have both been to matches. One match in particular, I remember years and years ago, the first shot out of the gun was 600 and something yards, cold bore shot, and you can't. You'll have a hard time hitting the target if you have a rifle that wanders a lot.
If you're zero wanders, cold bore shot issues, but especially if you're not even sure where your zero is at. Yeah. I mean, here at the school, we see it often enough that those shooters would be misses.
absolutely.
right out of the gate, especially
Yeah.
if it was a smaller target.
Yeah. And it's funny, I don't want to harp on about, the rifles that we build here, but we had a couple of school guns on the line. Just an aside here, by the way. We had a couple of school guns on the line again, and as per normal, as the shooter was getting used to it, we moved it 2/10 one way, 2/10 the other way, and then by the second day, he was back to 0-0, which is the same 0 that I would shoot on the gun, the same 0 Jamie would shoot on the gun, and it was just the guy getting used to the stock that he'd never been behind.
Yeah.
And it happens every single time we have a class.
Yeah, so what Richard is talking about, to try to explain it the best we can over the radio, is when people get on the school guns, a lot of times their 0 is off a little bit, 2/10 high, 2/10 left. And it's not that the gun's off, it's their technique of using it. They're not settled in yet.
Yep.
They're handling it differently, so of course it hits differently. This is why having that relationship with the rifle. So, but what happens is them and the rifle slowly settle down and start working as a team, and it will return to its original 0. It happens like clockwork all the time.
Every single class.
It's amazing,
where someone
actually,
takes
isn't
one
it?
of our rifles. Yeah.
So you take 2/10 left and 2/10 up,
Yeah.
and then an hour later you're taking that out, and an hour later it's back down
I
to 0
jokingly
again.
tell the people now, I said, we'll be taking that out by tomorrow.
Yeah.
And they look at me like, well, what do you mean? I'm like, well, you just don't you'll settle into it,
At first I thought it was just because we would zero the knobs right away, and then we'd zero them again, and and after a while I'm like, these things seem to be returning back to their original 0. I wonder if it's just the shooters themselves influencing their point of impact. And
Right.
that's what it is.
And
new
that's
shooters.
exactly what it is.
Yeah. So, but optics, we're going to do a whole segment on this.
Yeah.
We'll try to dive in. My goal through the next series of the podcast is to get you, so let's just say you're getting ready to go and learn the art of marksmanship. We want to go over the things that you should be really paying close attention to save you the heartaches and the frustration that we see when people bring their own rifles here. Now, as I said in the last podcast, from that day forward, it's issued rifles here because we don't teach our rifles. We use our rifles for the school to teach you the skill set, and we teach you how to set your rifle up when you get home. We teach you how to make a click chart. We're using our rifles as a tool to teach you everything you're going to need to know. And any rifle you can pick up, you can set up for long range shooting. But we're taking the equipment out of the equation to save this. And we've never had a customer that used a school rifle regret it, even if they had a high end customer of their own or rifle of their own. And the problem is we can't go over everybody's gear before they get here. And it just causes issues all the time. And I feel for the shooters. That they're not having as much fun as they should. It's frustrating as hell. And
Well,
you're
there's nothing worse than having some kind of equipment issue and the guy next to you is not having the equipment issue.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's just one of those things. You just sort of,
So the next podcast we're going to dive into is let's just dive right into stocks, and then maybe we'll do optics and then accessories to take into consideration, and taking it from a brand new shooter. Like if you were to sit down with me and Richard and say, look, I've never shot long range before. What advice would you give us to go out? And this isn't a sales pitch for our custom rifles either. This is saying, look, there are factory rifles you can do. Maybe here's some upgrades to consider. But if we were going to go out and recommend for someone that we would know that was new and say, okay, here's the best advice we can give you to save you some of these heartaches. That's sort of the approach that I want to try to take with it.
Yeah, and for people who are thinking of getting into long range and you're listening to the podcast for the first time, I hate to tell you this, but this can get expensive. And you can almost be guaranteed that Jamie and I aren't going to recommend the cheapest stuff that's out there, but only because, I know from my respect, if been there, bought that, didn't work, had to buy the better stuff eventually.
One thing that stuck with me is when we were younger, a guy come up to me and he said, the only time you smile when you buy something cheap is when you write the check. And he said, the only time you don't smile when you buy something good is when you write the check.
Right.
And I thought, I'm not saying you have to go out and buy the most expensive stuff, but when you buy quality, even though it might take you a little longer to save for it, in the end, you'll be happier.
Yep.
For sure.
Yep. And I think if one thing I've got out of being married for 25 years is I think I've taught my wife that as well.
Yeah.
Because I remember a while ago I was talking to one of my friends at home about long range shooting and about equipment, and we were talking about my rifle, and I said, it's a Schmidt and Bender. It's it was probably 40. I can't even remember how much it was, $4,000 when I bought it. And my wife looks at me and she goes, $4,000. And I went, yeah, well, I'm not buying another one. And by the way, I've had this one for like 15 years.
I was going to say that's $4,000 in 15-year-ago money.
Yeah, and that's right. But I mean, they're about the same price now, I think.
Yeah.
But when you think of it over the years, it's not very expensive.
Yeah. You take it across the length of time you've had it, and it still works.
And they don't go off.
No.
So you buy a good, I think probably you're more likely to keep your scope for a long, long time if you like it than you are your rifle, because you're going to shoot a different rifle or a different caliber or whatever. So scope's a major investment that you can, and there's some great reticles that you can get now.
And always keep in mind, too, we're not talking about going out and hunting and shooting deer at 100, 200, 300 yards. We're not talking about your typical hunting rifle or typical scenario. We're talking about people that really want to go out and enjoy themselves beyond 700 yards. And I think there's a big line when it comes to the equipment that you can get by with and the equipment that's going to cause you some heartache.
Yeah,
I mean, it's just, you're not going to have as much fun.
Right.
If anything, it's going to steal some from you.
Yeah, absolutely. And nowadays, there's a few brands out there for scopes in particular that are really, really good. And the reticle choices you can make are quite diverse depending on what you're getting into. If you're getting into F-class, or you're getting into, you're going to be a hunter, or you're going to be a precision shooter. So there's some big choices to make, and, scopes don't go off. That's the good thing, right? They rarely break if you buy a good one, and they last a long, 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 long time.
Yeah. So we'll do our research. We're going to come back in the next podcast. We're going to talk about chassis. We'll talk about selecting your stock or things to take into consideration when you're checking out this stock at the counter and you're checking out this rifle that looks really cool on the wall. Some things you can do to it to say, hey, this is really rubbery, or this doesn't just pass muster, right? And then we'll dive into the optics, and then we'll dive into the accessories. Now, before we continue on, I do want to say just a quick thanks to MDT. MDT's maker of fine rifle chassis. They are a proud sponsor of the show here. They make everything from the new JAE 700, which is a $2,000 chassis, right down to the Oryx, which is a $425 chassis. Chassis are nice upgrades because you can get one that fits you well, going to fit your needs. Usually has an adjustable link to pull and cheek piece, lots of different grips and options. So you can really fine-tune the stock for you and your needs, but it certainly is a nice upgrade for factory rifles. And in a lot of cases, like in this last class, all three of them would have probably benefited if they could have upgraded their chassis for sure. So you can learn more and look at all the fine selections over at MDT, and you can go to mdttac.com. That's mdttac.com. So any final thoughts? Again, just a preemptive, me and Richard talking about what we're going to try to cover. And I think the last two classes, first of the class of the year, the whole reasons is good intentions because we see this all the time. And I thought this was a great opportunity to say, we see it. We see the suffering. We see the consequences of sometimes not knowing what they don't know. And we want you to go out and have fun and enjoy shooting long range and hitting stuff.
I mean, definitely there's two things there, right? Firstly is the look of consternation on someone's face when they don't know where that round went because they've got the rifle's doing something weird. We never want to see that look.
No.
We always want the person to see where the round went. And then also, in terms of, performance and buying into what they need, it is difficult. Jamie teaches a reloading class here, and I often get texts from customers saying, hey, I'm thinking about buying this. Should I buy it? And I'm like, because I'm not Jamie, I can go, no, don't buy that. Buy this one because I've been using it for 10 years and it works great. And so I think that, it'll be interesting to see if we can reach enough people to make an impact maybe on one or two shooters. That would be good to save them some money in the long run and also get them up to speed faster.
Yeah.
And if we can do that, then I think we've achieved something. And if nothing else, it'll be food for thought for all the rest of you guys that like to listen to people talking about guns and shooting and long range.
Yeah, and the difference being is when you open up your rifle case and pull out your rifle, you have the confidence that I got this. Or you open up your rifle case, you pull out your rifle, and you're thinking, what's going to go wrong today? Am I going to be on? Hopefully my zero is good. There's totally two different mindsets. And I think we're trying to save the new shooters from getting caught up into that they're just not having fun at the range.
Yeah, which we don't want to do, and we don't want people wasting ammunition either.
Yeah, especially with the cost of it. So just real quick, we want to thank everybody for joining us here. If you enjoyed the podcast, don't be afraid to leave a nice comment. We really do appreciate that. It helps us a lot with our ratings. Also, if you enjoyed the podcast and like to share it, please share it. We always really appreciate that as well. You can become part of the Wolf Pack. So you can join us on Patreon. It's $3 a month. Thank you, everybody that's done that. We certainly appreciate that and supporting the show. And then also, don't forget, we have our online long-range shooting school. It is up and running. I believe we now have 44 videos up. And this week, we'll be talking about reticle perpendicularity and a test that you can shoot to test whether or not your rifle scope is set up. So if you're interested in the art of what we do and you can't join us here at our in-person long-range shooting school, you can always join us online and enjoy it from the convenience and the comforts of your own home. So, Richard, any final thoughts from you on getting ready for next week's podcast?
Yes, I'll do some research for sure on particular things. And also, everybody that I know, we talked about this previously, the little Leupold scope that we ordered 6 months ago arrived. So we've got to get that on a rifle and do some testing with it as well. So this one was it's a 4-12 second focal plane, but it has a zero stop and it only has 6 mils of travel. So it's a mil reticle and a mils on the elevation turret.
Which at max power, you can use the reticle for everything it was made for. And it weighs what?
What was it? It was a pound.
Right at a pound.
It was right at a pound. So for a hunting scope, goes to 6 mils, weighs a pound.
And it in mil radian, it tracks, has a zero stop.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's how much?
$600.
$600. Yeah. So we're trying
made in America.
Made in America.
Lifetime warranty. All that great stuff you get from Leupold.
Yeah.
And so we'll put it on a rifle and give it a go. And see what
I think Richard's already claimed it. But our goal with the optics is, just like we're talking about here, is coming up with really good choices and alternatives to the super heavyweight tactical rifles that will be on our long range guns. Because let's face it, putting a 3-pound rifle or scope on your 6-pound rifle makes a 9-pound rifle, and a third of it's the optics, right?
Yeah.
So can we come up with a good alternative to an entry-level scope that's not so expensive, that will work, but also keep the weight down of your hunting rig? And I think, when Richard was talking about ordering it in and we're looking at all the specs, and I'm like, 6 mils for the average hunting, I mean, that's
more
probably
than enough.
Yeah, it's probably farther than what most will shoot at any big game animal. Yeah. And the fact that it's a pound.
Yeah. So, I mean, it does have some parts of it that aren't like fantastic. It's only got a 40 millimeter objective lens. Obviously doesn't do illumination. The reticle that's in it isn't like tremendous. It's just the basic TMR reticle. Mm-hmm. I think it's, if Leupold product management is listening, if you can put a better reticle in that, you could probably charge $250 more.
Yeah, good point.
And I think a lot of hunters, it's not a big flashy scope, but if you're looking for lightweight and capability, I think it's fantastic. I've been looking around to find an alternative to it, and I cannot find it. You can find 1-8s, right? What do they call those? LVPO scopes. Mm-hmm. Right, that people put on their ARs, but you can't find anything more than 10 power that has a zero stop, that has mil reticle and a mil elevation turret.
Yeah.
So, Leupold, you've got something there. I think you should develop it.
Yeah, and what we're trying to do is we're trying to get a rifle down to around 6 pounds. We have a new carbon fiber barrel coming from IBI. We have a new stainless steel barrel coming that we're trying to put in our rifles, and we're trying to do that, but then we're trying to also find a scope that we can put on there as a package. We're trying to get a ultralight hunting rifle and trying to do homework on trying to find a nice weight scope that works. Remember, we're talking about like scopes that we would pick for new shooters. We struggle through the same thing when we're trying to select hunting optics. We got to have that quality that's going to repeat, track, and now we're trying to find something light. And so we go through the same buying process everybody else does. But Richard thinks he found it. I mean, he thinks he's found a really great lightweight hunting scope that really would work for guys like us that like to shoot at distance, but want to keep the weight down. We'll do some video reviews and we'll try to post up some stuff with it. And you might see it maybe on a package rifle that we'll offer on an ultralight. So thank you, everybody, for taking the time to join us here on the podcast. We really appreciate it. My name is Jamie Dotson. I'm your host. And again, thank you, Richard, for joining us here. And we'll see you all in the next podcast.